Have you ever wondered when you were looking inside the Flux Component Library if dropdowns are the best solution for your needs, or should you choose something like a select component? Now, I'm specifically talking about this dropdown versus select component because in traditional web development, so HTML world, a select element is just an HTML form control which is used to create a drop-down menu with a predefined options. So it's typically used in forms where the user have to select a single option or, of course, multiple options if multiple options are enabled. And drop-downs by themselves is just the general UI terms for a component which displays a list of items when it's triggered, either by like clicking or hovered, and it can implement using select element, but in most cases, developers create custom drop-downs using like div, ul, li, or etc. tags. So basically, both of them kind of serve the same purpose. Like if you go to drop-down, at the end, the goal is to open a UI, which opens by a click, to serve some kind of elements, which you can again click to do some kind of action, which can be a checkbox. Like if you go to the drop down, the normal drop downs here, you can go to, for example, the checkbox items, which can be a multiple checkbox items, like you can select multiple or a single one, is up to you, or you can do a radio style, which says that you can only create a singular, you can only click on a singular item and one singular item can be active at a time. Or there is also groups and submenus, meaning that you can open a menu and then hover here to open a submenu, and there you can click on, which again can be a radio or checkbox, meaning that multiple or one can be selected. So you have a few options with the dropdown, but you also have a component called select. And inside this select, you also have a bunch of options. So you can also open via clicking a button, you can also open a UI, which also going to hold a few items. You also can click on them to create some kind of actions. Now, of course, this one just selects the element and the initial UI will be updated with the selected element. So it's not the best solution if you use it for a navigation page. Specifically, it's explained here where it says the navigation menus are usually used with drop-downs, meaning I click here and it's going to be a drop-down, okay? So that's obviously not the best solutions for it. But if your intentions to open it, have elements, click on something, and that element has to be selected. So kind of like imagine it as a filter for a database table, okay? So, or for example, a menu option where you have to select in between certain items. Then a drop-down might not be the best option for you. Specifically that the select option has a bunch of variations and customization. Obviously, some of them is behind the pro version of Flux, which I own a lifetime license, and I can only recommend anyone to buy the lifetime access. It saves a ton of development work. So it has a few stuff that you can do. So for example, the native is going to look like this. But you can also do a list box. And if you select a list box, that's what's going to happen. It's going to have this nice UI design by it. And if you do that, you can also do a searchable element or clearable element or attribute added to it. And if you do a searchable element, what's going to happen is that you can search for it. So you can do like this and you can type in search. This is not available in the drop-down menu. So depending on what you need, you might see that this particular select component is better suited for your needs. So for example, in the end, you can also do these so-called combo boxes where you can type directly in here, and once you select it, it's going to update the selected part. So let me show you an example. So in our code, we do have a Flux dropdown component, and inside the Flux dropdown tag, we do have a Flux button, which is the button that initiates opening of the dropdown, which is going to be a Flux menu, a UI menu, like I said earlier, which holds certain items, which is in our case are language options that we can choose from. So the menu item going to have the href, which is on click going to do a certain a certain function, which is in our case going to change the language itself. So what it looks like in reality is that this language switcher, I click on the button, which opens a UI holding the items, and I can click on the items, which refreshes the button and refreshes the language. So I can go there, it's going to be Hungarian language. Now, of course, I could update the state inside the drop-down menu itself, meaning that the active item has to do the checked attribute. So if we go to drop-down, go to checkbox, as you can see, it has the checked element. Okay, so whatever is checked is going to be checked. Same for radio. If you do checked, that's going to be the item that is checked. I did not do that, and I won't do that because now we are moving into select option. So how we can do that is that we update our code base to be, instead of a drop-down Flux component and inside have a Flux button and have a Flux menu which is opened by the Flux button, instead of that we're going to have the Flux select main tag, and it's going to have Flux select options, which are going to be the individual line of content, which is in our case are the language options to select from, and that's going to have the on change event. So on change of the Flux select option going to trigger the same selected language, update selected language function that we did earlier. So our function is the same. We just trigger, instead of an on click in the drop down, we do an on change, which is going to be the on change of the selected option itself. So how does that look like in reality? Is that it's going to look like this. So the native browser select going to be looking like this. Now with select option, we have more customization option that we can do. So for example, what we can do here is that we can simply do a variant equals listbox, and that's going to be updating it from a native browser looking like to a kind of well-designed, more CSS, nicer looking pro version of the select element. Now, of course, this particular stuff is a pro version, so if you don't have a pro version, you can't do that. So let me just go back and find it. The actual list box right here, variant list box, this is only option if you have a Flux Pro version. Now we can also do more stuff. So for example, we can do a searchable, so we can do also clearable. So let's just go to the searchable right here. So a variant list box with a searchable attribute would look something like this, meaning I can type inside and find it by that. So we can do that also here. We already at variant list box. What we need to do is just add the searchable attribute here, and that's all it takes basically. If you open, that's going to be searchable, so you can search for the language that you want to. So let's say I want to do English, I can just search, select, will be selected. I can go back here and then it's going to be English. I can go back into the language, select, I don't know, Hungarian, go back, going to be Hungarian. I'm not going to go into detail about our own translation script that I'm working on. It's specifically about Flux component. You select versus dropdown and which one you should choose into your own project that fits to your needs. Now, of course, myself, I updated to have the selected option based on the current language which is stored in our session. So you need to take care of the actual currently selected item, meaning I can go out from here into somewhere else and I can just hover back into this Livewire component and still going to be, I can refresh the page if I want to, that's still going to be there. And that's because I handle how and why the actual particular row has to be selected already arriving to the page. And how I do that is that I do current language, which is going to be session language. So I'm getting with PHP out the current session language, which is going to be, in this case, if we select Hungarian HU, so the current language going to be like this, HU, okay? So we return the current language and we say data current language equals the variable current language, which is right here getting the session language. So now we have a data current language. So what we do then is that we have the constant current language, which is the select element get attribute data current language, and if current language, and then we do some timeout, and then what we do is select element value equals current language. So we call this as a initialize language selector. So once we have the Livewire page activated, so we just like arrive onto it, you know. So the Livewire navigated kind of call, which means that so Livewire navigation arrives, meaning that I was here, and with the SPA style navigation, I arrive without page refresh into my language switcher. I will, however, still going to initialize the first language here. And also if it's a dump content loaded, meaning I did an actual refresh like this, it's still going to initialize it. So both of those methods are going to fire up this initialize, which is going to take the current data language and going to update our selected option with the current value. So I prefer this one in terms of like drop down versus select element. Of course, there are certain stuff that you would not be able to do with select element. So for example, I would not use select element for a navigation stuff. So if you need a navigation, selecting an actual navigation item and you click and it gets navigated, that should not be a select element. But whenever you want to select a UI and get a certain element selected from it, which stays active after that, it might be a more clever option to use select than you would do drop down, which at the end gets the similar results, because not all select elements are like the drop between drop down and select is that some of the drop downs is a wider terms, and some of the drop downs are actually acting like the select element, because like radio item drop downs here at the end, even if they do not have the button updated, if you click here, what's going to happen? Well, it's going to be selected. Okay, it's going to be checked, it says check, but still at the end, this particular item from the dropdown is selected and stays selected. So you might have a better solution with the select, where you can customize it with search box, etc. You can still place icons or stuff inside, but you have more options to customize. So just to summarize that where we started and where we ended, our old code was a dropdown, so a Flux dropdown, this particular part. We started with a button, and that particular button was gathering out the current language based on the actual session language. And upon clicking the button, a Flux menu opened, and that particular Flux menu was iterating through the language options that we hardcode into with a simple for each loop, saying that for every single code and language, so as you can see, S code and language, meaning the left side is a code, the right side is the language. So for every single of these elements, create a Flux menu item with an href link of the current request URL, whatever that might be, with a extension of $lang equals the code itself, meaning that it's going to be ES, FR, IT, HU, DE, N, whatever. And we did a simple on-click event saying that upon clicking inside this menu on the particular menu item, do an update selected language function and send the particular code along with it with a formatting of our like. So we updated this one and we said that from dropdown, let's do this with a select element, which is just this part right here. Before the select element, a PHP tag where we gather out the current language from the session itself. And then we do as a variable current lang, and then inside the Flux select, all we did is we did give it an ID, give it a placeholder, of course, which is going to be the selected language itself. We did a variant listbox styling with a searchable attribute, and we did an onChange call. So instead of onClick, as you see it here, onClick select, we did a onChange, the same update selected language call, with the value itself, and then we did a data current language being equal to the current language, which is again gathered out from this variable from this session itself. And what that did is that the particular select options are listed as such, not with a for each loop, but we actually just wrote it out ourselves, or the options in this case. And then these particular options are, upon being clicked on, going to fire up the update selected language with this. So this value, being that the value is an LESFRIT, same how in the previous code we were sending the code, so SR, FR, whatever, HUDE, so we're sending the code on click, we are doing the same stuff, but on change we are sending the value from here, and then of course inside the actual update language we take care of everything, etc. So that's how we upgraded from Dropdown into Select. Now also what you can do is that you can add images or icons inside your select elements. So for example, if you use a language switcher, we could be adding like small flags or icons of flags inside, which doesn't have to be hero icons. You can just create your own icons and add them as a Flux icon, because you create your own SVG icons and then you can call them as like you would do a Flux icon call. Which is another method to actually make some differentiate in between the select elements. Or also what you can do is that you can add like a load bar or spinning bar. Where is it? Right here. So it says Flux icon.loading. This is not inside the hero icons collection, but it's the spinning or loading bar for Flux Component Library. Now we can use this in our case because we could place right here a nice spinning load bar until we load our new languages, because as you can see right now it just loads like this without any indication of loading. And we have an AI translator, which sometimes can take even 5-10 seconds if it's a new language. So what we could do is that we could, let's actually create it. So what we could do is down below the select element, we could do a Flux icon loading. It's just icon loading, right? Let me just icon loading, yes. So what we could do a Flux icon loading, and then let's give it an ID name. This is so that we can identify this with JavaScript and we can modify it whatever we want to. So let's call this lang loading spinner. Doesn't matter what you call it, just remember what you call it. And then let's give it a class, and the class of course is going to be hidden. Now why the class is hidden is simple, because if I do not add the hidden class, then the load bar will be always just, well, loading. Let me just show you. It's always going to be spinning, just like this. But if I add the hidden class, Tailwind obviously, that's going to be hiding it. So then what we could do is that when we have the language switching, before I start switching the language, this is where I would do the show, just some command, show loading spinner, like this, okay? And let's create it. So what we can do here is simple with JS. We do a document get element ID, so document get element by ID, and then we'll call the actual ID that we just named it, and I said remember it, so lang loading spinner. So we just simply calling the actual ID here. So get element by ID loading spinner, and then we'll do a class list dot remove. And what we're going to remove? We're going to remove the class hidden. Okay, so what this is going to do, once we switch the language, it's going to remove the hidden class, and then the load bar going to initialize right away, and then it's going to direct us. We also can add some fail-safe mechanisms. So for example, we can do, if the request would take a lot of time, which is going to be in our case because it's an AI translator, that we can actually hide the spinner after a certain period of time if it would not be hidden. So what we can do is hide the spinner after timeout, in case navigation, I don't know, takes time, like this. Okay, so what we can do here is we do set timeout, like this. We'll open a bracket, and then inside we'll open another one, like this, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to do an equal arrow, and then we open a actual bracket, and inside we're going to do document again, get element by ID, get element by ID, and then we'll call our lang loading spinner again, of course, and then we'll do the class list, but not remove, but this time we're going to add it, and we add back the hidden class again to it, like this. And then once it's done, what we can do here, like this, let me just do like this, comma, we can do the timeout here, let's say 5,000, we can close this one, this, and then it's done. So what this does is that it's going to have some timeout effect, so even if the request would take too long or the load bar would get stuck or something, it will be actually removing it, so adding it back the hidden class to it again. So how we can test it, let's see, we're just switching in between languages, and as you can see, this nice load bar has been appeared, and as soon as we land on the new page, it's going to be removed because the default value is hidden. All right, you see? So this is, there you go. This is what we did, and that's how it works. Now, of course, you could also do some extended, even more complicated stuff where you add the particular load bar from here inside the select element, which would include you not just simply doing like single lines like this, Flux select option, that's it, but each of these Flux select option, you would add an additional div class inside the div class. That's where you add your icons, etc. We could do that, it's a little bit more complicated, but that would mean that the actual load bar icon will be inside the select element until it's not selected and the request itself is not executed. Alright, so we just rewrote the actual Flux select options into what I was telling you, that you can place icons inside the select elements, and specifically not just icons that you see in hero icons, but you can also do the load bar itself and place it inside the select element. So that's what we did. We did translation select elements, and then inside we created divs, and inside the divs we did the actual name, and then what we did here is that we did a Flux icon loading with an ID specifically for the individual languages, because obviously you cannot have multiple items with the same ID, so I can't just do like loading like this. That's not going to work, because this is going to be loading, but then this cannot be loading if this is. So you need to have unique IDs for each of them, which is going to be loading followed by a this character and the actual language code, which is EN, DE, HU, etc. Obviously class is hidden just like before, and then when we do the update selected language, obviously we are sending the value along with it, which is the actual language code itself. That has not been changed. So what does this mean? It means that when the actual update language, update selected language triggered, this is the same that was before, so we are directing to the URL followed by the question mark lang equals lang code. But since we have the lang code, what we can do is we do a const loading spinner equals document get element by ID loading, and again the icon followed by the lang code. What does this mean? That it will get the, so it says this is triggered with a lang code. Let's find the loading, this character followed by the lang code, which is, let's say we are triggered this from Deutsch, so that means that we triggered from loading character DE, so it knows that this is the loading spinner that it should be looking for, right? And then it says if loading spinner, and loading spinner class list remove hidden, so it actually removes the actual spinning icon. Now, of course, and this is where you put back the timeout, obviously, just like we did in the previous one. So that would be the time where you just do the set timeout, and you do the whole situation again and set the timeout. And then after a given timeout, what you can do is you add back the hidden class just like we did before. But let's just quickly test this one. And this going to mean that if I select the Deutsch, the icon not going to be here, but it's going to be inside, like this. You see? So that's kind of what it is that it's going to have the load bar icon inside. and all you needed to do is a little bit change of the code, but not much. Now, of course, here you can customize, because you do have a div class here. So you have the actual text in the spawn element, and you have the icon, so you are free to play inside. If you want to move the load bar into the right side a little bit, or middle or left side, whatever you want to have it, up to you, but that's how you would do it basically. So that's it, the whole drop down versus select element. Hope I helped someone. These videos are going to be about Flux, Component Library, and Laravel, and Livewire, and stay safe and build. Bye, ciao.